Welcome, Gail. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, your book, Three-Martini Afternoons at the Ritz, The Rebellion of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. First of all, you are like the foremost scholar on Sylvia Plath. You must be the most accomplished Sylvia Plath scholar in the world. Is that true, pretty much?
Well, I think that's very kind of you to say, but I think there are many really amazing Plath scholars out there, and I don't think I could take a top spot. But certainly, I spent a long time researching Sylvia Plath and writing about her, and this is actually my fourth book about her. So,
I,
I've dedicated quite a lot of time to her, really.
I do want to talk about this book, but I first just need to know, like, what draws you so much to her? Why dedicate your professional life to delving so deep into another woman's career and life and history? And like, what is it, do you think, that draws you so much to her?
Yeah, I mean, it happened by accident, which is a very odd thing, really. I was 13 years old at school in a library, and we were just told to spend the afternoon choosing a book and reading a book. And so I just randomly went to the poetry section and pulled out this collection, which was randomly, very randomly, Sylvia Plath. And I opened the book, and it was the poem Mirror that started with the line, "I'm silver and exact." And my 13-year-old self just, I honestly fell into this book, and I've never got out again. And I'd never heard a voice like it. And then from the age of 13 onwards, I just started reading everything that she'd written. And but then oddly, my background isn't in English literature, and it isn't in literary theory either. I'm a sociologist. So I'm coming at it from quite an odd angle, really, I think. So looking at I suppose, the cultural figure of Plath, and why she has such significance for so many people. And my PhD was about why people become so attached to her. And I spent 4 years researching that, and I still don't have an answer.
Ah,
I mean, obviously,
4 years
she's an
well spent.
incredible writer. Yeah, but so that I think there are lots of reasons, but people seem to have a very special relationship to Plath, and I can obviously relate to that. But I still never really quite managed to know why.
So interesting. Um, well, you also in Three-Martini Afternoons at the Ritz, you also track an interesting path at all the different intersections of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton's lives, how they grew up, only 4 years apart and in basically the same town and outside Boston, um, and how there were so many parallels between the two and yet so many differences, and how they culminated finally in them getting to know each other after this course they were both enrolled in. But you use it as a great way to really shine a light on what they were even writing about and some of their innermost feelings and how those came out over time. And I was particularly struck by their shared frustration at their roles, sort of as these, upper middle class white women trapped in the roles of mother and the limitations on their roles in society at the time and how they fought against that. So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that angle of the two of them, and how they kind of dealt with that, the mothering section, the feelings about their sort of lot in life when things, if they had been born today, things would be very different, but they'd probably be like bloggers and whatever. But anyway, tell me a little more about that.
Well, I suppose I was quite interested in the ways in which, I mean, the kind of subtitle of the book is The Rebellion of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. And I was quite interested in all of the ways that they kicked against that 1950s message of what women should be and the type of wife they should be, the type of mother that they should be. And I was quite interested to explore what parts of that 1950s very patriarchal ideology they had absorbed, and which parts of it that they decided to just completely boot out of their lives. And it was interesting to see, you could see them balancing that tension. And particularly with Plath, I think you can see that in so much as she was determined to be this amazing writer, and that her time should be her own and that she would carve out writing time, she still wanted to be the perfect wife and the perfect mother and the perfect cook and the perfect homekeeper and all of these different things that she was trying to manage at the same time. Whereas I think Sexton was a bit more relaxed about that. And I think she was much bolder and had seemed to have much more confidence about taking time for herself, grasping it, not caring if her house was messy. You know, she had someone who came in to clean for her, to do her laundry. Her husband did the cooking and all of the shopping for food. She had family members who drove the children to school and took them to their lessons after school. So I think Sexton was more comfortable with rejecting that those traditional expectations of what she should have been doing as a wife and a mother, whereas Plath seemed to be very much trying to handle it all and do it all and be exceptionally brilliant at all of it as well.
There were a couple times that I just wanted to read a quote or two. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Hold on. Actually, this is more, I wanted to talk about them. Actually, okay, scratch that. I'll delete this part. But because I do want to talk also about their relationships with their own mothers and their own families. But just a little piece more on growing up so constrained. You know, you pointed out there were all these ads and everything in the culture at the time was pointing towards how women belonged at home and, you know, get your wife this Hoover vacuum and, you know, that's what she needs. And there was just so much pressure to be a wife. And yet they had these thoughts and feelings that they expressed in their writing, particularly the quotes from Sylvia Plath in her early work about not wanting to feel this trap and saying that her writing was really the only way out of it. So how do you think they used their writing to kind of escape the trap of where they felt themselves ended up to be? That was not my most articulate question, but I think you got the point.
No, I think you're completely right. I think they actually directly used their writing to manage the rest of their lives, and certainly Plath is very open about this, and there are at least, just off the top of my head, there are at least 2 letters that I can think of where she actually states, I can only be a wife and mother because I write, and that she would not be able to do all of that domestic, you know, take on that domestic responsibility if she didn't have time to write. And so I think that writing was absolutely vital for both of them, and certainly in terms of, I think for Sexton, writing was vital in terms of keeping her quite healthy too. You know, her daughter, Linda Gray Sexton, who's written 2 very eloquent, articulate memoirs about her mum and growing up with her mum, talks about how, you know, my mum was never crazy when she wrote, you know, that she kind of, you know, the times that Anne Sexton, I think, became most ill were the times, Linda said, when her typewriter fell silent. So in that sense, I think writing for them was performed a number of different purposes. And what's interesting is that both of them also saw it as a business too. I mean, it was a career, it was a job, it was a business. And although they both state, you know, we don't do this to make money, we do this because we have to write, they both also say, but also we like to get paid and we want to get paid fairly and we should get paid. Sexton in particular, she was like a one-woman campaign activist for fair pay, you know, before all of that was even kind of in our social consciousness. Her letters are astounding when you read them.
Then when she didn't win the prize, there was some prize that went to the 3rd member of their sort of trifecta in the class, and she was so upset that she hadn't won it when her poem was probably better. She's like, a man got it and this is why.
Yes. Yeah.
I love how you also talk in this book about the effects of their upbringing and how there's this cultural sort of assumption that these women and mental illness and things that have happened with them are only because of their own makeup, when in fact their upbringing has completely dictated, or at least has a huge part in how they've ended up, how they ended up becoming, and what happened with their early lives. And Sylvia, the 9 years after Sylvia Plath's dad passed away, and how her life sort of took on a totally different shape after that in these years that she doesn't talk about, and her relationship with her mother, who ended up having to take on the burden of being a single mom with two little kids and having to support the family and not necessarily being warm and loving. And then you contrast to Anne Sexton and her very question mark relationship with Nana, and how that might have affected her upbringing, and the things you inherit essentially that can change your mental makeup. Tell me a little more about your thoughts on what's happened, like what actually happened in the family, and how that translated into how perhaps their emotional makeup evolved over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can just sort of just set off by saying, I mean, one of the main reasons for writing this book was because I find it very tiresome and very annoying when women like Plath and Sexton are written off as these crazy poets. It's this very, very lazy stereotype about women writers, and they're just written off as these mad poets who, they were always going to kill themselves, and it's, it almost becomes a joke. And I just wanted to explore and try to perhaps argue that there's a bit more going on here. First of all, let's blast that useless and quite annoying stereotype out of the water, because it's not helpful, it's sexist, it's misogynistic. We don't need it in our lives. And think about what was actually going on in their lives and try to look for a more multidimensional explanation. Yes, of course, there might well have been psychological reasons, maybe for all I know, even physiological reasons why some people are more prone to depression than others. But also there are environmental reasons too. And I think when you look at their upbringings, you can certainly see elements that took place there that would have created trauma in both of their lives. For Plath, the loss of her father; for Anne Sexton, potentially being sexually abused by her father, although this is not confirmed and we have to be quite careful about that. But certainly the way that Sexton wrote about it and spoke about it in therapy, there's certainly a big question mark over that. Her Sexton's emotionally distant mother as well. So, she was constantly wanting her mother's love and never quite getting it and getting disapproval instead. In contrast, we have Plath, who had, in her own words, quite a suffocating mother who didn't let her breathe. That was, she shared a bedroom with her until she was, in her late teens, early 20s. So, they had these perhaps unusual elements in their formative years that I think would certainly have influenced their future behaviour, perhaps their future mindset, and how they were able to negotiate their own way through the world as well.
I love how you joke. You were like, maybe they joked at one of these martini afternoons about the fact that they each got the wrong mother for the kind that they needed for their personalities. And like, perhaps they should have swapped.
Yeah.
Worked out a lot.
I mean, I know that, yeah, I mean, I guess speculating like that isn't the best thing to do, but it's so tempting to do that. They had such great senses of humour, and I'm sure if they moaned about their mum, they were like, oh, you should have mine and I'll have yours. You could just picture that conversation, especially after the third martini.
The thing that I really loved in this book, well, many things, but that you clearly have had in your hands these artifacts of the women, right? Like the address books, and even the image of the Anne Sexton's lock of baby hair on like a pink tissue, carefully wrapped, and Sylvia Plath's like longer, ponytail or something. I mean, it almost like gave me the chills thinking that you must be, you today looking at these items. Like, tell me what that feels like. And obviously you wrote about it really powerfully, but what did it feel like for you, having to remember that these are not just fictitious people, these are actual real living people, multidimensional, with like belongings? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never happy when I'm in an archive. And kind of handle these possessions and to handle manuscripts and personal artifacts and, as you say, hair, typewriters, pressing the keys that Anne Sexton pressed and that Sylvia. So it's a very evocative experience. It's a very, in a kind of, in sociology language, we would use the word spectral or ghostly. It's a very ghostly experience. And I feel, a kind of a sense of them being there in some way, because what are we are made up of the things that we own, the things that we are, our hair, things, it's like having a part of them there with you. And I've just written a short piece actually that will be coming out in America in a couple of months about combining that with audio as well. So not only having their hair and having their handwriting and their address books, but listening to them. And it's like they're over your shoulder. It's, you can almost feel them breathing on you. And so it's an experience that I both love in terms of just, it's very immersive, but also I think it really humanizes them as well. We have a tendency to mythologize these women because they were so brilliant and they were so good at what they did and they almost seem superhuman. But then you see a draft of an early poem where there's really clunky sentences and it really doesn't work, and you think, oh, they were actually human after all. Really bad. I mean, they were brilliant and it ended up brilliant, but they didn't always get it right. And so that kind of, I love that human aspect of them as well. And you can have a Plath manuscript and it's got a coffee ring encrusted, or so many of Anne Sexton's papers have cigarette burns in them, where she's obviously been smoking and the ashes dropped onto her papers. And so it's very, very evocative. And Anne Sexton's address book still smells of nicotine, which is also very odd as well.
Wow.
And it's like traveling back in time,
Oh my gosh, I love that. So what is it about their time together that you feel is worth noting? The intersection of actually when they got together, and like obviously their disparate careers and lives, and the intersection of those are fascinating. But what is it that drew you to these afternoons, for example? Like, why structure the book in that lens, if you will, or was it a device created in how you decided to write the book? And maybe I should ask how you decided to structure the book in general.
I think that the first thing that I wanted to think about with the book was that although it was being called a dual biography, I wanted it to have I wanted to look at them through a particular lens, which was their rebellion. And the thing that I found particularly fascinating about them, and also something quite maddeningly elusive about them, is that their lives collided for this really short period of time. So they didn't see that much of each other. I mean, they maybe would have had, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 martini afternoons together. It wasn't many, and they didn't really spend that much time in each other's company because shortly after meeting Plath went back to England at the end of 1959. And so they stayed in touch by writing to each other, but again, not hugely frequent letters. And also quite maddeningly, Anne Sexton's side of that correspondence is missing. So we only have Plath's letters to Sexton. And so what I found fascinating was that this moment in time, this collision that happened between their two lives, then kind of sparked off this whole influence on each other. Because initially when they met, if you read Plath's journal, she's so jealous of Sexton. She's furious, she's kind of waking up at 3 a.m, absolutely raging because Sexton's got published in places and she hasn't, and Sexton's got a book contract and Plath hasn't. So there's this raging jealousy. But then in the poetry workshop, Robert Lowell makes them work together. And then obviously something happens there and they become friends. And so they start going out for these martini afternoons, which I imagine were an absolute riot. So I imagine they were great fun. Accompanied by George Starbuck, who was another poet in the workshop. And so I really wanted to use those very few, very short meetings to kind of meander off through the book. So the book isn't necessarily, it's kind of chronological, but it isn't, because I didn't want, Plath was born in 1932, and then I wanted it to be a little bit more interesting in terms of exploring some of those themes. So I tried to structure it in a way that would perhaps make sense to people who didn't know too much about their lives, but would also allow me room to use this particular lens of rebellion to explore their lives in terms of all the ways in which they were rebellious, all the ways in which they weren't, and when they weren't, why might that be? That there were certain things that they were still hanging on to. And so that was the kind of theory behind the structure of the book, really. But I just thought that, the idea of drinking martinis in an afternoon in the Ritz, I mean, it's so glamorous as well, isn't it? So,
Totally. I hope you're planning on eventually having some sort of Ritz centered party where everybody drinks martinis.
as soon as possible.
Please invite me. I will come across the
Yeah,
planet.
definitely. Definitely invited.
Yes, I would
we
like
might have
it.
more than three martinis. Though,
Okay, great. Wow. So what do you think if they were our age today, these ladies? First of all, do you think they would be on medication? Do you think they would be like, what do you think their lives would be like? What do you think they would have contributed? What do you think?
I mean, I would have hoped in terms of their mental health, they would have received much better, more effective, less barbaric treatment. They were both subjected to really quite traumatic experiences, as the chapter on mental illness explores, particularly Plath with her botched ECT that she received. So, and Linda Grace Sexton has written about her mum that she does believe that if her mum had been alive today, she would have been properly medicated, and would have hopefully have had a much more comfortable, happier life. So that, you would kind of hope that. In terms of what I mean, it's really interesting to think what they might have made of things like Twitter. I mean, I think certainly they both probably would have been great at Twitter because they were so good at witty one-liners that, and whether whether they would have blogged or not, I don't know, because I mean, it certainly towards the end of Plath's life, it looked as if she was going to increasingly be doing, for example, becoming a critic. So she was, she'd got a job on the BBC on a program called The Critics, where she would be reviewing books and theatre and I guess music and things like that. So it would have been interesting that she might have become a bit of a social commentator herself, So I guess if she had access to the social media, that would have been useful for her. And I don't know. I mean, Sexton, I think. It'd be interesting because Sexton was a writer who worked so hard on her drafts. She worked and worked and worked and reworked, sometimes 20, 30 times. And I imagine if she was trying to blog doing that, she'd be completely exhausted. So, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to think how they would operate. I think they'd see a lot of similarities. Some things haven't moved on at all, have they?
Very true.
Slightly better.
So now, of course, you as a woman have added your own book into this, infinite universe of literature written by women about things, and you have your own commentary on everything as it's seen through this lens. So where do you go from here? What is next for you? What would you like to see happen with your own career? And like, what's coming up? Are you going to keep delving deep into these women? Do you have another book coming? Will this be a movie? That was a lot of questions.
Well, I do have another book coming, and hopefully the publisher will be talking about that quite soon. I'm just at the contract stage. I can say it's not about Plath or Sexton, so
Okay.
I'm moving away from those two lovely ladies for a little while, although they'll always be part of my life. So yeah, there'll be another book, and then kind of around this book, I'm writing sort of shorter pieces that will be coming out. So pieces about working with their audio and also a piece about choosing photographs for the book, because I think photographs are so important, and I love writing about photography. And and I spent quite a lot of time deciding which photographs should go into the book. So writing a piece about that. And so there's lots of, little things that will be going on around the book that are not in the book, but will be also about the process of putting the book together as well. And then it will be, straight into the next book, which of course is going to be really difficult with, because we're still kind of in lockdown in the UK, so no international travels allowed. And I could do with being in some archives as well. So it's interesting trying to negotiate research when you can't leave your house.
Yes. That sounds great. I can't wait to hear what your next project is. And by the way, the book trailer that you have for this book with the pictures, I don't know if you picked those pictures for the trailer, but those were awesome. I just loved it. I mean, it was
thank
great.
you.
So.
Yeah, they're the pictures that are in the book. So.
Okay, great. Interesting. Love it. Well, what advice would you have for aspiring authors?
I think it takes, and I think this comes across in Three-Martinis as well, I think it takes a lot of persistence, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of managing your own emotions, I think, because writing is such a personal thing, and sometimes things can feel quite devastatingly personal when they're not, so getting rejections and things like that are really difficult to manage. And somehow, I don't know how, somehow you have to hang on to self-belief even in the face of really terrible times. You have to believe that you can carry on doing it. And I think a big difference for me was I'd previously published 3 books, but the big difference for me with this book is that I was really, really lucky to get an agent, and a really good agent who we get each other, we're completely on the same page, we have the same interests, and although that may not be that relevant, it makes working together really enjoyable. So and I think having an agent is a good idea for an aspiring writer if you can get one, just because you have that extra support and you feel much less alone as well when you have an agent.
Excellent.
And the other thing I do is try to connect with other writers too, particularly if you get a bad review or if you get a rejection, because everybody's been there. And it's just quite nice to be able to share that, and then also be able to share the really good news and the exciting news, and just, because it's very solitary. And I think that's the biggest challenge for me as a writer, is just how isolated you can be, and, because it's something that you mainly do by yourself. And I also live by myself as well. So I'm kind of quite keen to network and get to know the writers. And but it is, as Plath and Sexton write about so eloquently, it's about persistence.
Wow. Well, Gail, thank you so much. I'm so impressed by just how great a researcher and author, and how you bring these women so to life, and what a joy it is to read about them and learn more, and really view them now as like whole. I just feel like I know them much better, and I've already been very interested in Sylvia Plath over the years and felt like I knew enough, which I obviously did not. So I just, my hat's off
That's
to
so
you.
nice. Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's really nice.
Well, thank you. And I hope, hopefully I can connect you to lots of other authors, because I'm always talking to authors, and would love to put you in touch with whoever. So yes.
Oh, that would be really nice. Thanks.
Okay,
So,
perhaps at the Ritz. So.
even better.
Even
Yeah.
better. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thanks so much for all your time.
Okay. I was just going to say, this is. Are you still recording?
Here,
I
I'll
was
stop
just
the
going to.
recording. Hold on.